So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged into another battle replay, and this one is on a map which I haven't actually shown in quite a while. I believe this is the Iron Hills, although for the purposes of this battle it will be masquerading as the Misty Mountains, because the red team today are all going to be made up of the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. They are going to be facing a coalition of men and elves, an unlikely coalition of men and elves, but nonetheless they are going to be here to try and wipe the goblin filth from the face of the mountainside. Now, this one was sent to me by Rules 1, so it's got the blue team, getting into it, because obviously Rules 1 is on the blue team, is made up of 3 Linden armies, and then the one human army is going to be the wild men from Rudour, so a bit of very clever diplomacy must have been engaged in to ensure that they switched sides and are now fighting on behalf of the good people of Middle-earth. Now, it is also worth saying that I have changed around my reshade settings once again, because I'm sort of, again, trying to sort of fiddle around with it, because I do feel as though the settings that I would usually use, they have a few issues when it comes to everything seems to blend together, because it's very colourful, which is good, but unfortunately it does tend to make the units sort of blend together, and it's quite difficult to sort of see what's going on. Even when you zoom in, it's quite harsh on the eyes, I think. So I've dialed it back a little bit, and so this is a sort of darker palette, which, you know, some people may not like. We'll see how it goes. But I do feel as though it does make up for it in other ways, so we'll see. Again, it's one of those things which is constantly changing for me as I sort of fruitlessly try and find a reshade setting that I actually like, but at the very least, all of the reshade settings I use are better than sort of the base game, so regardless of what I do, it will be a step up from that at the very least. There is also going to be a bit of a depth of field effect going on, because it does somewhat sort of hide the fact that you have that unit pop in that Medieval 2 is pretty well known for, but there's very little that I can actually do about that. But I think we will start off with the blue team, seeing as we're down here right away, and playing as the Wild Men of Rudour, we have Froggy. Now, clearly, Rudour do have some tools that Linden do not. They do actually have some similarities, weirdly, in the fact that both factions engage quite heavily in javelin-based warfare. But Rudour, of course, as an evil men faction, much more focused around numbers, which could be very useful on this flank, as it is the more open flank of the Iron Hills, and so having a few more numbers to try and withstand any sort of Misty Mountains assault will help out Linden's overall lack of numbers. Rudour also have a lot of AP, which Linden have to rely on their javelins for, so again that can be very useful against the Misty Mountains goblins in pretty much its entirety. There are very few sort of goblin units which don't rely on their armour to survive, and even those that don't tend to be very low tier, to the point where even basic units can kill them off. So we have a combination of Rudour marksmen and Rudour swordsmen here on the front line, so again, Rudour will be able to skirmish with the lowly goblins. The crossbows might prove to be a bit of an issue, but as long as the Rudour marksmen stay out of range, they should be just fine with their additional ammunition. And the Rudour swordsmen will be able to defeat heavy goblin infantry, which is going to be a very important detail, because this of course means that Rudour's front line should be able to trade relatively cost effectively with the most basic of the Misty Mountains front lines. When it starts to get into some of the more elite units like Fearmongers, they might have to be a little bit more careful. You can see also some stakes deployed on the front line from Froggy here, presumably to try and sort of dissuade any wargs from charging right into the front. Also, he's got some upgraded Rudour clansmen back here, so they have the armour upgrade, which makes them pretty tanky, particularly to arrows. They have a big shield value, and obviously with the armour upgrade they can absorb arrows very nicely. They add a lot of mass to the front line as well. Not a huge amount of killing power from spears like this, of course, because of the spear malice. But against basic goblins, they should still be able to get a fair few kills, and obviously they will add that much-needed mass and anti-cavalry protection to the Rudour lines, which is always going to be very nice, of course. We have another unit of Rudour clansmen over here. The line actually extends right the way down there. There's some Rudour clansmen over on the flank as well, so a lot of spears here from Froggy. Rightly, I would say, going for a more numbers-focused approach, because he has got Linden to back him up. So of course that does mean that Linden can handle the quality relatively easily. But he has got nothing but clansmen, marksmen and swordsmen, I think. So it's a very sort of uniform army. Meanwhile, I had taken the liberty of having a look at Rules' army beforehand, and he has got a very nasty looking army indeed. So he has got a High Elven catapult and a High Elven ballista, so unlike Froggy, who may have some hidden units of course, because Rudour do have some units that can hide. Some artillery over here will certainly help out, particularly seeing as one of the Misty Mountains army seems to be poking out in front here, so they can potentially 2v1 here, if they are quick enough. We also have a front line made up of Mithlon pikemen and the Noldoran guards, so obviously this is a very solid front line indeed. Not a huge amount of numbers, but he does have more than you would commonly see. He's got a fairly hefty amount of Noldoran guard actually, and some Mithlon pikemen to back them up, so obviously there's very little the Misty Mountains are going to be able to do to fight them one-on-one. They're going to have to try and tilt the balance of the fight in their favour somehow, whether that's through cavalry charges, avoiding the pikes, through their crossbows or their javelins, but really outside of stuff like the Blackback Berserkers, the Noldorin Guard are not really going to break too much of a sweat against the Misty Mountains infantry roster. And then he's got several units of Wardens of Elos Tyrian as well, so this is it's not a very typical army, this, from Linden, because you don't often see this many Wardens of Elos Tyrian. Now, it is worth saying that as strong as this could be in the choke points of the higher sections of this map, it could also backfire pretty spectacularly if he decides to try and skirmish with them, because obviously they are not great in a skirmish fight, and lowly goblins can easily get their money back if they are skirmishing with rangers. And he also has some cavalry, so he's got some Noldorin Horse Lords, which of course terrific knights. They lack a little bit in terms of survivability next to some other knights because they don't have a shield value, and they also do not have the most armour, as most of the Linden roster tends to. But they are very, very good in melee because of their additional melee skill, and obviously extremely devastating off the charge. And then he's got more Noldorin Horse Lords. This is an incredibly elite army. That's 3 units of Noldorin Horse Lords. I don't know what the Misty Mountains have got in store to try and deal with that. And he's also got some Mithlon Nobles. So I believe this is sort of almost like a pre-agreed upon scenario-like situation here. So a very elite Linden army. The Rudauer army is not that strong, however. So that Misty Mountains army in front of them is still in trouble, but provided they can just sort of whittle down Rudauer and Linden a little bit, the more defensive positions at the back there in the hills should sort of suit the Misty Mountains very nicely. Again, a huge glut of Wardens of Elos Tyrian, more Noldorin Guard as well. He too has got a High Elven Catapult, he's got the Mithlon Nobles, some Horse Lords, more Noldorin Horse Lords, some High Elven Ballista, and then a couple of units here of the 4 Linden Archers as well, who are right in range of those White Uruk Fearmongers which have been left behind. So not great for them, but some very elite Linden forces here. So we've got more 4 Linden Archers, we've got more Wardens of Elos Tyrian, more Noldorin Guard. So very, very similar armies. In fact, they might be exactly the same armies in terms of their layout for all of the Linden forces, but still 3 very elite Linden armies. But the Misty Mountains do have the defensive position, so we'll see how well that will serve the Misty Mountains here, because for a start, we have this very nice sort of narrow passageway which Linden will have to take, and some very nice archer positions which the Misty Mountains can take up. So we have RH Cloud Pyro playing as the first of the Misty Mountains armies. He's got some White Uruk Fearmongers. Not going to be so effective against Linden because the pikes can outrange them, and the Fearmongers AP will not affect Linden too much, although with all those Noldorin Guard, for once, AP might be useful against Linden. Black Uruks as well. Good unit. Again, not on the same level as the elves that they're facing, but even so, a lot of men in the unit with 203. The crossbows are going to be absolutely key here against Linden armies like that. They're going to need to use their AP bolts to their fullest potential, as well as the ballistas if they can get them into a good position. Lots of heavy goblin spears. There's also Azog here, who's just sort of poking out. Lots of heavy goblin spears indeed. And then a lot of Warg Riders as well. So again, the Warg Riders should do decently against the Noldorin Horse Lords if they can 2v1 them. But if they get into isolated situations, especially if the Noldorin Horse Lords are able to get a charge off, it could be pretty messy. And then we've got more heavy goblin crossbows over here. And then, as I'm sure we noted just before, we do have Tidasium, who has got 3 units of White Uruk Fearmongers who are right in the firing line of those 4 Linden Archers. They are going to need to retreat very, very quickly if they are going to be useful at all in this battle. And back here, the rest of his army, so he's got some Wargs, again, more Black Uruks, he's got some heavy goblin crossbows as well, another Orc Ballista, and a huge amount of heavy goblin spears. It's a very strange looking fight, this already. And then we have Engsvets, who again, I would imagine that the armies are all relatively similar here. So he's got a lot of heavy goblin spears, he also has some Warg Riders, another Ballista, more Black Uruks, some more White Uruks, another unit of White Uruks with Azog in there, so that's going to be the general, and then several heavy goblin crossbows as well, very, very key here. And then poor Starling, who is out here on the open field, is going to have to face down a fairly garbage Rudauer army, but also all of those Noldorin Horse Lords are going to come barreling towards him pretty quickly, I would imagine. Lots of heavy goblins, Black Uruks. Again, the Wargs, he's only got 1 unit of Wargs, so that's not going to be enough to stop the onslaught of Horse Lords which are on the way. Goblin Archers, heavy goblin spears, heavy goblin crossbows, goblin archers, snugger. Yeah, I mean, it's not the sort of army which is going to withstand Linden. It could withstand Rudauer, but not Linden. Anyway, without further ado, this is a long one actually, so let's begin. Again, if you see a cut here, it will be because everyone's sort of repositioning themselves and sort of getting ready for the fight, because this is a 70k frames battle, which means I think there's going to be sort of a period of manoeuvring around where they sort of get into the positions they're supposed to be in for the fight. We shall see. Yeah, those White Uruk Fearmongers are not under fire, so I would imagine, based on the fact that Starling is indeed going to be moving into a more defensive position, which is only correct because he would have been absolutely mown down by all of those Linden cavalrymen and Noldering Guard if he was forced to stay here in the open field. So he's going to get into a more defensive position, which is good to see. So I will make a cut here while everyone moves into position and while the rain falls down, and we will rejoin when the battle is starting and when the higher sections of the Misty Mountains are laid siege to. And so we rejoin with a pretty sneaky ambush here from Tidasium, who's got a couple of these Mountain Orc Berserkers up on this little hillock over here, and you can see that the Misty Mountains have fallen back to essentially the top corner of the map, which is understandable, and even with just a quarter of the map really being used, there's a lot to this map, a lot of layers, a lot of high ground, which we will be seeing throughout the course of the fight. But even so, this is a very sneaky little move, this, because it's unlikely that these Mountain Orc Berserkers are going to last very long, because as soon as some Linden forces and of course some Noldorin Horse Lords are moving forward to try and assist the Rudar Marksmen, but the Rudar Marksmen were hoping to get up onto this hill and to start shooting, particularly into stuff like the Ballista, which is exposed up there, and of course the Orc front line. But that is not going to be allowed to happen by Tidasium's Mountain Orc Berserkers, at least not for the time being. And you can see now that the Ballistas up on the highest portions of the cliffs are now also starting to fire into the main ranks of both Rudawa and of Linden. And the Mountain Orc Berserkers coming downhill, obviously as shock infantry, the initial charge they get off is going to be pretty important, and they have managed to kill off a few of these Rudar marksmen. Ultimately, while this is a pretty sneaky ambush, I don't think it's going to come to too much, because I don't think they're going to be able to kill off the entirety of a unit of these Rudar marksmen. And ultimately, with all of these Noldorin Horse Lords around, it's going to be pretty tough for them to keep up this assault, because again, just a few charges from these Linden Knights and it's going to get pretty messy. You can see already that one of the Knight units has charged in from the front. The spears of the Rudar clansmen are now moving forward as well, which the Mountain Orc Berserkers would do pretty good against them in a vacuum, but the Rudar clansmen are merely acting as the anvil to the Noldorin Horse Lord's hammer. And that is not going to be good for the Mountain Orc Berserkers. You can see how quickly a unit of basically 200 orcs has now been cut down to nearly a quarter of that. At least I think they start off with 200, or at least 160. Either way, devastating charges from the Noldorin Horse Lords. The Mountain Orc Berserkers are here, so it's always good to see an ambush like that, I think. You know, it's always good to see people sort of caught with their pants down, as it were. Taken by surprise, and initially some good kills on the Rudar marksmen there, and potentially that could help them from a skirmish point of view. Because the Rudar marksmen are really the only archers on the field today for the attacking blue team that are going to be able to sort of get into an elongated skirmish fight. Because you have to remember, all of Linden's archers pretty much are the Wardens from Elos Tyrian. So they are not going to be able to skirmish too much, especially not when what they're skirmishing with are crossbows, and considering the position that the Misty Mountains have taken up, it's definitely going to be a bit of a challenge for the blue team here. They're definitely going to need to attack from several angles all at once. These Mountain Orc Berserkers are still fighting away here on the front line, trying to inflict as many casualties as they can, but there are simply too many Rudar clansmen. Heavily armoured spears are exactly the sort of thing which axemen like this are going to enjoy facing. You can see that still the Rudar clansmen are taking losses, and the Mountain Orc Berserkers are still eager and fresh. I'm actually a little bit surprised that these Berserkers up here are not, or these Horse Lords I should say, are not getting another nice rear charge, because there is a gap open over here for the rear charge, and here it comes. This is going to be the end now of the Mountain Orc Berserkers, the Ballista bolts raining down on the other Linden Knights in the background there. Not actually as devastating as you would think there, but even so, that should be the final straw here. One more charge should kill them off. You can see that even though it wasn't the best of charges, there's still a lot of corpses there from where the charge took place. And this should mean that the Rudar marksmen will be able to take up the original position they had intended to, and to start raining down some arrows onto the defensive position. I'm amazed these Mountain Orc Berserkers are still in the fight, actually. Again, as a Berserker unit, I suppose you shouldn't be surprised that they don't have a lot of common sense, and they're just going to sort of stay in melee and inflict as much damage as they can before they die. But vice versa, even though while these axemen should do pretty well against the Rudar clansmen, the Mountain Orc Berserkers don't exactly have a lot of defensive skill, and they don't exactly have a lot of armour either, so the Rudar clansmen should be able to inflict some fairly decent damage of their own, at least relatively speaking, considering that they are spears. And still these axemen refusing to give up, even though there's only a few of them left, these shirtless hooligans. And again, I feel as though they're a bit of a unit which people tend to overlook in the Misty Mountains a little bit. You kind of forget that they are in the Misty Mountains roster, because they are a pretty good ambush troop, as we've seen just then. We can also see, however, that up on the hill there, you can see The Misty Mountains Ballista is trying to snipe out one of the pieces of Elven artillery, which again, completely unsurprising because Linden do have a lot of artillery. And they will need to use it to their advantage as well, because it is a pretty densely packed Misty Mountains front line, and it's mainly the killing fields in front of the front line, which I think Linden and Rudauer should probably be concerned about. If we have a little look up here, you can see several units of crossbows and ballista just ready to sideswipe the entire advance as they move forward. And obviously this, you would think, would be the primary avenue of attack. There is another one, of course, like I said before, as we're down in the canyon. There's this road over here, which they could also take. But Cloud Pyro's army has not really moved since the start. He was the one that didn't really need to move at all. So he's still standing guard over there, but he does have, of course, the forces of Met Grim ready to move forwards as well. However, unsurprising to see the skirmish fight beginning immediately. We have the Rudauer marksmen trying to get as many kills as they can. They're already, well, some of them are winded, some of them are warmed up, but obviously the mad panic when they saw the Mountain Orc Berserkers sort of loom out from the grass. And now they're going to try and get some kills, but again, it's not the best of shots for them. Trying to kill off as many of the crossbowmen and potentially some of the artillery crew as they can as well, but like I said, certainly not the best shot. You can see here the heavy goblin crossbows. They don't have the best shot either. They're having to arc their fire. I think they're going to go for the high elven ballista, which in this case is probably a good idea, because they should be able to kill off the entirety of the crew if they get their shots right. Whereas I don't think the opposite is going to be true. I think already Froggy has sort of ceased fire with his Rudauer marksman, seeing that it's rather fruitless to try and shoot up such a sheer cliff. And he's not going to be able to kill off enough of the crossbows to make it worth it. Tidacium, however, is still getting a few kills. It's obviously still very much the opening phases of this fight thus far, but it is I do feel as though the Misty Mountains are going to win or lose this fight based on how much damage they can do with this sort of firing position up here. Because if it comes down to just sheer melee, you know, with that many Noldorin Guard units, and all it takes is for one gap to be opened up in the line, the Noldorin Horse Lords can cause some havoc. Based on how densely packed the Misty Mountains formations are, and based on the fact they've got a lot of spears and halberds, it might not be so OP. But just to see so many Noldorin Horse Lords on the field is a pretty scary thing to behold. There's also a lot of Wardens of Alos Tyrian, so while the densely packed nature will help them against the Knights, it will be very much the opposite against all of the Linden Rangers. Rudauer certainly acting as the sort of the fodder in this fight for Froggy, but I did also notice on the approach that he does have several units of Ferodrum Javelins and Trollshort Axlers as well, so it's not entirely just sort of basic units which are designed to be the first wave in. He does have some heavy hitters. The Ferodrum Javelins in particular could be pretty damn nasty if they're used effectively, both in melee and at range. Here though you can see immediately heavy goblin crossbows doing yet more damage to the high elven ballista, which is trying to shoot into the bulk of the Misty Mountains line, getting some kills on those heavy goblin spears there. But I can't imagine this is going to last too long. Again, this Misty Mountains ballista just putting some additional pressure on. I mean, there's a lot of Noldorin Guard down there, which again, any kills you can get on Noldorin Guard, very much worth it, because the goblins are going to stand no chance against them in melee. Trying to snipe out more artillery. Again, Linden have got a lot of artillery on the field today. A lot of catapults, a lot of ballistas. You're only going to be able to kill off so many of them, I think. And I think Linden will be placing more emphasis on their catapults here, based on how densely packed this Misty Mountain formation is. The catapults should be able to cause a decent amount of damage. There's Goblin Archers back here, of course, ready to try and support their front line, but I still worry for the overall quality of the Goblin front line, of course. When you're facing down that many Noldorin Guardsmen, they're definitely going to be having to sort of... The White Uruk Fearmongers are going to have to put the whole front line on their back, really, in order to sort of ensure that it stays fighting, because even the Black Uruks and the Heavy Goblin Spears, which are pretty decent for what they are no match here for Linden. Meanwhile, it looks actually as though Grim is not going to go round the other direction. He is instead going to give some of his forces to this frontal assault over here. Maybe just sort of trying to combine their forces over here. You can see here the wargs sort of coming down a little bit, maybe sensing that Grim is not going to come along this way after all. Which is a little strange actually, because I feel as though while obviously there is a very nice firing position up here, most of the crossbows are up in the previously mentioned position over here. A lot of clansmen. There's a pretty, again, just on the hillside there, all of these heavy goblins ready to start shooting. Tidacium, I think, is still going after that high elven ballista, and in fact, I think as you can see over here, yeah, there's only one left at this point. Still firing away, and they could still do a decent amount of damage. Again, it looks as though they did get a nice hit there into that densely packed goblin formation. But But again, it's only one ballista. They've done a decent amount of damage here, the goblins. So it's an interesting one for sort of Linden and Rudauer to try and sort of solve here, because Linden's armies are all very elite, but this is a situation in which Linden's low armour and they're not exactly geared for the sort of attritional sort of combat that they're going to be engaging in here. It'll be interesting to see how well they can do. It'll be interesting to see if this goblin formation is going to be enough to hold them back out, because certainly the quality is so heavily in the favour of the blue team here. Didn't even see any blackbacks, although they can hide, so there probably are blackbacks here and there. I think this is the sort of the highest position you can go to on the map, so this is very much the last stand position for the Misty Mountains. So they can still retreat yet further if they wanted to. It just goes to show how much of the map is still in effect, even though the more open areas of the map further down the mountains are not in play at this time. Meanwhile, crossbow bolts flowing into the Rudauer clansmen just to sort of give the blue team something to think about this, I think. You can see that the 4 Linden archers are now also trying to fire in, and they will actually lay waste to a ballista crew pretty quickly. Again, elven archers are very accurate, of course, and this ballista is on the edge of the cliff, which is always interesting. When the medieval 2 artillery tries to move close to a cliff, it tends to sort of slide off it. Very interesting bug that it has going on usually. But also medieval 2 artillery takes so long to move. So, I mean, honestly, you can see here they're already in real trouble. As Cloud Pyro, I think he's going to try and snipe out that final ballista over there. Which, I suppose, seeing as there's only one left, you may as well try it. Is he going to be successful, though? He's still using fire ammo, but I think he managed to actually hit it with his first one, and he did. Very nicely done indeed. Risky to use the fire ammunition, but even so, I think now he's going to push the ballista out of the way. He has hit what he meant to, and now he's going to retreat. The 4 Linden archers, meanwhile, what are they going after? Looks as though they're going after the White Uruk Fearmongers, which again, very good target, because without the White Uruk Fearmongers front line, the Misty Mountains front line stands no chance at all against the pressure that Noldorin Guard can put on, and obviously all of the reinforcements from Rudauer and obviously the Linden Pikemen will only add to their dominance, so it certainly makes a good amount of sense to focus down these targets. There's a lot of crossbows still in reserve. There's a lot of wargs. I mean, considering there's a lot of sort of, again, Linden Knights and Misty Mountains wargs on the field today, it's interesting that this fight is going to be quite constricted into this sort of this higher section of the map. And that suits the Misty Mountains more than Linden, I think, because it does allow the wargs to be used defensively if the Noldorin Horseswords are trying to push their way through. The wargs can be used to patch up the line, and the anti-cavalry bonus should do quite well for them there. They won't win 1-to-1, but in terms of efficiency, the wargs should do okay for themselves, and obviously pinning them in place for something like the crossbows to get a few volleys off as well. Not sure what they're really firing at. Again, you really don't want to be burying crossbow bolts into the floor right in front of your units, because the crossbows here are going to be the key to victory for the Misty Mountains. And again, coming up again, it's a long old fight, this. And so far it looks as though, again, the emphasis is on the blue team here to sort of make the first moves. I mean, the Misty Mountains are not going to budge from their position. You can see here the 4 Linden archers are still just trying to sort of poke away at individual targets when they're going after this time. Black Uruks perhaps, or Goblin archers? Goblin archers would be an interesting target. Again, I feel as though the Misty Mountains could be a little bit more proactive as well. They could move their Goblin archers a little bit further forward, but there's a lot of Rudauer clansmen. Again, the marksmen are just in behind as well. And now here come the Wardens of Alos Tyrian. So, again, this is very much the putting the emphasis back on the Misty Mountains. If you're not going to move, or if you're not going to engage in any way, we're going to send our rangers forward and we're going to start ripping through your ranks. And they have rangers to spare, so they can send the odd unit of rangers forward just to sort of probe like this. It's not often you can send forward a unit of rangers without fear of misusing them, but you can see here that even against the shielded and armoured heavy goblin spears, the body piercing going to be coming very much into effect. Very densely packed formation that. So, what do the Misty Mountains do here? They're going to have to start opening up with their ballistas and their crossbow battalions up on the hill there, I think. Because if they don't, they're just going to sit here and be shot down over a long period of time. Very much like playing Empire or Napoleon Total War. The blue team. And you can see here, actually, I think the Heavy Goblin Spears are going to try and move forward to engage in melee, which is all well and good, but again, Rudauer very much prepared for this. Heavy Goblin Spears are better than Rudauer Clansmen in melee because of that AP they have, but all the Rudauer Clansmen need to do is block the advance of these spears. And that is exactly what they're going to do. And that is going to allow the archers of both Rudar and Linda to continue firing into the goblin blobs. This fight engages. I do like the look of the upgraded Rudar clansmen. They don't look elite by any means, but they look pretty good, I think. The chainmail, the spectacle helms. Misty Mountain's going to send forward any more units. There's another unit of heavy goblin spears there. You can see the heavy goblin spears actually balance of forces isn't evenly matched, and I would imagine as this fight continues, the Rudar clansmen will start to fall away pretty quickly, because the AP can make all the difference here. It turns the heavy goblin spears into just being a regular fodder spear unit, into actually being quite dangerous fighting infantry as well. But you can see here the 4 Linden archers may be out of ammunition, but they have pulled out their blades. They will not be quite such a great target. I don't think they're out of ammunition. I can't imagine they've used it all already. Some Rudar clans are moving forward. I mean, they must be, I suppose. Coming in to try and help out the beleaguered Rudar clansmen. And now the heavy goblin spears. I mean, there's still a lot of them to cut their way through. But that could be enough to tilt the balance of forces in their favour. Heavy goblin crossbowmen still waiting. Here you can see the ballista essentially being forced to go into these ranged units. The ballista, what it would be most effective at, of course, is if there was a big blob fight down here shooting into the blob, because that would get plenty of kills then. Another unit of Rudar clansmen on the way forward again, coming forward these spears. Just these initial engagements, they're not going to be too terminal for either side. But I definitely feel as though, with how Linden and Rudar have set up so far, they've had the stronger opening, I think. The Misty Mountains have chosen to be very defensive in their setup here, going into the corner of the map, which is fine. I think they need to. If they tried to take this Linden army head on, they would be absolutely destroyed. But this does bottle them up, and this does allow the most fertile killing grounds for the Rangers. And I would probably rather try and take on the Rangers in this sort of battle than try and take on all of those Noldorin Horse Lords in the open field, because that would have been a bloodbath. More Rudar marksmen getting into position, obviously certainly not as dangerous as the Wardens of Elos Tyrian, but they will still be able to put on their own range pressure as well, doing some damage to potentially some of the more lightly armoured or unshielded targets. The White Uruk Fearmongers still proving to be the main target of the attackers' affections in this battle so far. Meanwhile, this unit of heavy goblin spears, defeat does now seem certain, with another unit of Rudar clansmen and those 4 Linden archers coming in. But the 4 Linden archers, of course, not the best in melee. Elven archers tend to be better than other factions' archers in melee, but even so, I mean, the 4 Linden archers are the lowest of all the Linden archers. If you want an archer that's good in melee, you do want the Wardens of Elos Tyrian with their dual wielding, or the Harlinden Guard, of course, with their spears, which can be good for that anti-cavalry bonus. These Noldorin Guard certainly making their presence felt on the front line as well, with all of the Noldorin Guard they have at their disposal. Having the odd one on the front line to make sure that the Misty Mountains can't counter-attack and wipe Rudar's infantry away is definitely the play here, I think. Still those Wardens of Elos Tyrian firing. And again, you can just see back here the carnage that they've wrought already. One of those units of heavy goblin spears got absolutely mown down by the Linden Rangers, and there's plenty more where that came from. There's another unit of Wardens of Elos Tyrian moving forward now. It's whether or not the Misty Mountains can hold up against this sort of onslaught. And Rudar, of course, still applying their own spearmen to the front line to make sure the Misty Mountains aren't tempted to try and charge forward and wipe away this largely archer force on the front line. There are Noldorin Guard on the front line as well, of course, but again, a quick assault. And you can see actually this unit of Wardens of Elos Tyrian already out of ammunition, so they've obviously gotten plenty of kills, I would imagine, and now they've got their 2 swords, which again in the late game they could prove to be a pretty decent unit to have as well, because the Misty Mountains, not the most skillful on average, and the Wardens of Elos Tyrian as far as rangers go, outside of stuff like the Lurt's Hunting Pack, which has multiple HP, probably the strongest combatant in melee. Well, these Rudar marksmen, the Rudar marksmen are getting shot by the Goblin archers. I'm very surprised, honestly, that they're going after the Rudar marksmen with all of these archers and crossbows. I'm extremely surprised they're not going after the Wardens of Elos Tyrian, because that is where the true danger lies. Certainly not in these basic Rudar archers. They will do damage, of course, and they will be a pain. But, you know, priorities, we'll see. At least they are shooting at something. More spears are coming forward, a lot of spears in loose formation back here. This unit of heavy goblin spears has held its ground for quite a long time, but now they're shaken. All of the men from Rudar are on the front line, the turncoats coming forth, aiding the elves. And here come the heavy goblin spears. Again, the AP will be useful against these Rudar forces, and it will even be useful against the Noldorin Guard should they decide to try to get in on the action. Overall, of course, the Noldorin Guard will still very easily win without any support for the heavy Goblin Spears, but still, one of those very rare times when AP is going to be handy against Linden. There are the Wardens of Alos Tyrian shooting right in, point blank, into this unit of heavy Goblin Spears, several of them falling almost immediately. It's a fairly thin front line of Rudar Clansmen at this point, though. Maybe a few more infantry units necessary. There's still more Rudar Clansmen to be committed, of course. There's no Rudar Swordsmen on the front line just yet. What about this position up here? And again, these crossbows, they are shooting, but what at? Looks like they're trying to go for the Noldorin Guard, which is a good target. The AP, of course, of the crossbows will be very, very good. And they are doing a decent amount of damage, but of course, in this particular battle, there's plenty more of that in the Linden armies. Trying to kill off these crossbows as well. I think that's mainly for Linden archers, though. Again, certainly not the easiest target. They're going into after the Rudar Clansmen now, the Noldorin Guard getting into loose formation, so going after the more densely packed area of troops down here. Still, you can see that these heavy Goblin Spears are broken and fighting to the death. Well, these Rudar Clansmen are still getting peppered. So those heavy Goblin Spears, one of the rare times where fighting to the death is actually proving to be quite useful, because these Rudar Clansmen are staying blocked up for the crossbows. But yeah, it goes to show how much morale damage the Rangers can do as well, because that was a fairly healthy unit of heavy Goblin Spears, all things considered, the last time we saw them, and now they're broken and fighting to the death. Rudar Clansmen trying to get out of there, because obviously that was a bit of a killing ground for them, but those crossbows firing their bolts in. More archers, more arrows being fired into this position up here. There's a lot of crossbows up here still, though, which is the saving grace for the Misty Mountains, and they are rationing them pretty well. They know not to just dump all of their ammunition into the attackers all at once. Eventually, of course, Linden and Rudar are going to have to commit more heavily. But I mean, at this point, this front line is looking a little bit ropey. I mean, there's a few units of spears. There are plenty of reinforcements, of course, but a lightning strike could gain a bit of ground for the attackers here. Meanwhile, these heavy Goblin Spears are routing. They might come back if they return before they reach the edge of the map, which is not too far away, though. 61 is still a fairly healthy unit number to have. Meanwhile, only 18 of these heavy Goblin Spears are on the front line at this point, and that is not going to be enough for them to defeat these Rudar Clansmen, I don't think, and it doesn't matter. Even if it was, there are plenty of reinforcements on hand. The life of a Goblin means just sort of throwing your corpse in the way of the enemy. Meanwhile, more Wardens of Alos Tyrian marching potentially point blank here. Again, this demands a response. And it is going to get one. It's good to see. Goblin archers firing in. Again, the Wardens of Alos Tyrian, much like the vast majority of the Linden roster, certainly not focused around armour. And they are not multiple HP, so if any of those arrows sort of hit their mark, be able to do some decent damage. These Rudar Marksmen, they're still firing away, and of course the Rudar Marksmen have got a lot of ammunition. They're not going to go away anytime soon. Which is another sort of challenge for the Goblins of the Misty Mountains to overcome as they find their backs to the wall. These heavy Goblin Spears are still routing all over the place. I think they routed towards Noldorin Guard, which is a very puzzling direction in which to route. There are still plenty of heavy Goblin Spears to fight their way through, but heavy Goblin Spears, which are usually pretty efficient on the front line, will find themselves outmatched here. Again, these Wardens of Alos Tyrian are firing in. What are they going after? They're shooting in here. Actually going after the ballista. There's only 12 men left in that ballista, so Starling needs to get it out of there, because those Elven archers, lethal when they find their targets. Ooh. And you can see here that more of the ballista crew dying in that volley. There's 9 left at this point. I think you'll be able to get them away. At least you'll be able to get some of the ballistas away. This one seems to be sort of stuck in the mud at this point. There are some wargs over here as well, which are a pretty juicy target in and of themselves. Very poorly armoured. Still going after that ballista crew, but there's obviously a lot of heavy Goblin Spears they can go after around here as well. Still under attack, the Goblin Archers. Only 24 of them remaining at this point. And I think this has been a pretty good tag team effort so far, because clearly the Wardens of Alos Tyrian, they're not going to want to waste their ammunition on Goblin Archers. They want to go after the big blobs, do a lot of damage. The Rudar Marksmen, on the other hand, much more suitable for skirmishing against archer units like this. That is the distinctive sound of crossbows being used, and they are trying to kill off some Noldor Guard, and now we're going to see the Noldor Guard start to push into melee. We also have the Snaga skirmishers, which reveal themselves from hiding and are immediately being targeted by a huge array of archers. Look at how quickly they're being ripped apart. Both the Rudar Marksman and the Wardens of Elos Tyrion doing damage. Again, the Snaga skirmishers, while they may be the lowliest of javelins, it's still AP damage. That can still be the sort of thing to tilt a fight against an Noldor Guard in your favour, especially with the heavy goblin spears here as well, adding their own AP. But that is, I mean, that is brutal. These poor Snaga, revealed for all of like 10 seconds and they're already mostly dead. You can see here, definitely a more concerted push this one. The Noldor Guard leading the way and getting some backup from the mass of the Rudar clansmen. And again, heavy goblin spears. Not bad in their own right, but they are certainly going to find themselves hideously outmatched here. And there you can also see the distinctive blood spray that the Rangers produce when they fire right down a line. They've taken a fair amount of losses though, so the Misty Mountains have been doing their best to try and skirmish down the Rangers as best they can. And there is obviously still those positions up on the cliff. Now might be a good time to start using the crossbows or the ballista, particularly into this blob over here. I mean, it's not too much of a blob, but it's still Noldor Guard. And unfortunately for them as well, you can see these Rudar clansmen pushing right around the flank, trying to wrap up the line, deal with this front line as quickly as they possibly can. It was going quite well, but now the Rudar clansmen are finding themselves sandwiched between the goblins they were trying to stab in the back, and now a fresh unit of heavy goblin spears as well, so it's probably not going to go too well for them if we're being honest. Those Rudar clansmen, they will fight pretty hard though. Rudar not known for pulling their punches in melee. Even their spears have got a fairly decent damage score of 6, I believe, which for basic spears like them is pretty decent. Rudar clansmen moving in, so again more of the Rudar spears. But obviously the centre of this attack, very much the Noldor Guard, which is actually struggling a little bit, and again I feel as though this comes down to the fact that obviously we're hearing the crossbow bolts whiz around, and that is going to be why the Noldor Guard are not just carving through these goblins as quickly as possible. The heavy goblin spears will do some damage of their own, of course, but without support the Noldor Guard would certainly kill heavy goblin spears, so the Misty Mountains trying to make good use of their range tools, and this could be a bit of a problem here for the attackers. They have got some reinforcements on hand, but certainly these wargs trying to sort of munch on some of these archers, and they are going to get into melee with these Rudar marksmen. And the Rudar marksmen are going to be very displeased to see the wargs charging towards them, but more Noldor Guard are marching forwards. And there are still the Rudar clansmen, but it is worth mentioning, I suppose, that a lot of what Linden have got, not exactly the most efficient at taking on wargs like this. Again, all of the sort of spear units were really the Rudar clansmen, and most of them have already been committed to the front line. Perhaps they should have committed the swordsmen forward first instead, and here we can see another unit of Wardens of Elos Tyrion which are going to be charged, trying to kill off as many of these rangers as possible. It might actually be worth just sacrificing these wargs at this point. They've caused enough chaos, they've chased the enemy very far, and there's still that unit of wargs in the background as well. So good work this from both Engsvitz and from Cloud Pyro. Again, it's all relative. What do you want to trade with what? The Rudar marksmen pulling out their hand axes to try and kill off these Warp Riders, broken and fighting to the death. But still getting a few kills on the Wardens of Elos Tyrion. We know how dangerous rangers can be after all. And these wargs over here cycle charging into the back of this force, and they've done a lot of damage. They killed off basically an entire unit of Noldor Guard, only 15 remaining, and actually shaken after taking those charges from the wargs. And I like it when people are proactive like that, because just saving your wargs to the end wouldn't achieve a great deal, because you're going to be forced back as the Misty Mountains here. So trying to use them in this sort of situation is good. Of course, this could backfire now that the Dolder and Horse Lords are also being used a little bit more aggressively, as we sort of get an overview of this whole front line. But the Misty Mountains line, while they've taken a lot of casualties, being the Misty Mountains, they have plenty of reserves, and their front line still hasn't really moved. And it's still made up of anti-cavalry units, so the Noldor and Horse Lords are not going to be able to kamikaze through these lines. Yeah, and you can see that these wargs, there's only 14 of them remaining, but a bold sally out. Again, it definitely had its downsides to doing that, because a lot of the wargs got butchered en masse, but it definitely gives the attackers something to think about. And again, being proactive like that is always the way to go, in my opinion. Killing off a few of the archers, and the sooner you can deprive the attackers of more of their archers, the sooner that you can make this all about being a melee grind parked right in front of your own crossbows, which is how the Misty Mountains need to win this, I think, if they're going to. But now, of course, the normal service is resumed on the front line as the Noldorin Guard are here, once again, supported by the now very depleted Rudar clans. And I think there's a couple of units of them still alive on the front line, but they must have taken some fairly hefty damage from that hammer and anvil charge that went on. And there's also these Warns of Elos Tyrion moving into a very exposed position there, and the Cloud Pyro is immediately going to charge them down with his walks, I think. They are shaken, however, so it might have been a ruse all along to get them in range of the other rangers, and now, of course, we have the Noldorin Horse Swords blocking the way, and that is going to be enough to break the Warg Riders. If they were the Bolg champions, perhaps things would have been a little bit different. They would have held their nerve a little bit more in melee. But as it is, it was not to be. These heavy goblin spears are also shaken at this point, so again, fighting all of these elven elites is starting to take its toll on the morale of the goblins. The White Uruks, I think, do have a buffing mechanic that they can engage in when they're on the front line. Again, they do cause fear, I know that. I think they inspire nearby troops as well. Perhaps. But regardless, the White Uruk Fearmongers would at least be holding their nerve a little bit more than the standard heavy goblins here. And while the heavy goblins have actually done pretty decently overall, you can't expect them to do too much in pure melee against Noldorin Guard. What is going to do them in here, I think, is going to be their morale. Well, a frontal charge there from Creed. Well, technically a frontal charge, sort of going through his own men a little bit there into the heavy goblin spears. I think he's trying to break their morale because they are shaken. So a charge from his cavalry should be enough to sort of send them routing. Obviously charging headlong into armor-piercing spears is not really what you want to do as cavalry, but that rear charge there was enough to break off those spears. And now the rather scattered nature of this Misty Mountains front line is probably going to start to bite them. So again, those wargs, they counter-attacked, but unfortunately now the initiative is with the Linden cavalry. More Noldorin Guard are pouring forward again. To see Noldorin Guard in such numbers is something which you don't see every day. Very depleted unit of heavy goblin spears here. There's heavy goblin crossbows which are somewhat exposed at this point. There's another unit of spears being committed to the front line again. Just the endless tide of goblins which the elves are having to sort of cut their way through here, but they are managing it. And now they're going to receive some backup from Rudar Swordsmen. Now Rudar Swordsmen, of course, do not have the Spear Malice, so they should be a little bit more effective in melee. A little bit more killing power with those hexagonal shields. Of course, certainly not as strong as the Noldorin Guard, but a little bit more infantry killing power on the front line here. And the Noldorin Guard, now you can see the Misty Mountains front line is starting to be pushed back a little bit more. Those ballista bolts are coming in. Again, relatively scattered shots there, but still, the ballista, if it gets one nice hit right down the unit, can certainly turn the tide of a battle. And there are the heavy goblin spears. Defeat seems certain, naturally, as the legions of Noldorin Guard fall upon them. This unit of heavy goblin spears are still fighting on the front line, and they are actually going to get some backup from some Black Uruks. Black Uruks will do pretty nicely against the Rudar Swordsmen, actually. But again, with the Noldorin Guard, I'm not so sure. Excuse me. Here's some Linden archers as well on the front line, trying to engage the heavy goblin spears. But again, this is one fight where the heavy goblins will actually win. But unfortunately for them, they do have an exposed flank, which is allowing the Wards of Elos Tyrion to just rip through their front line. Oof. Noldorin Horse Swords, you can tell that they're sort of buzzing around on the front, trying to find a gap, and that might be a gap over there, but I don't think they would get very far before the heavy goblin spears would just sort of move out and block that progress. The Noldorin Guard, I think, are going to try and maybe push through and block the block. Maybe? No, the Horse Swords are going to retreat. Ooh, that was some nice hits there, right into the centre of that Rudar Swordsman formation. Rudar Swordsman, not the primest of targets to go after with your artillery. They're in a dense enough formation that it could be understandable. Ooh, another ballista bolt going into the Wardens of Elos Tyrion. Some Rudar Swordsmen coming forward now to help out the Linden archers. Again, I kind of like the look of the Rudar Swordsmen. The sort of brown, the sort of the patches of metal that they've got. They're certainly not sort of elite, supremely equipped troops, but they're not like the garbage armour and weapons that the orcs tend to use. And the Rudar Swordsmen definitely giving the front line a little bit more of a stronger feel in conjunction with the Noldorin Guard. However, so too the Misty Mountains have now got a stronger front line. But the Black Uruks here, they will be able to stand up a little bit more in melee. Oof. Still just ballista bolts flying all over the place. Friendly fire This Noldorin Guard, meanwhile, has managed to push in behind the lines, and they are engaging the Snaga, which that will be a very one-sided fight indeed. So they've gotten into the cookie jar a little bit here, Rules, with his Noldorin Guard. And there isn't really any... Well, I say that, there is another unit of Black Uruks on the way from Enxvitz. These Noldorin Guard are going to try and get into the Heavy Goblin crossbows, but they may be overextending themselves a little bit here, the Noldorin Guard. They're going to need some more support than this, especially with more Black Uruks on the way. And especially seeing as they've exposed themselves a little bit there to some Heavy Goblin crossbows. That was enough to make them shaken, actually, so that was a very nice volley indeed. Meanwhile, these Black Uruks, the problem with the Black Uruks, of course, is the fact that they are going to be very much the target of most of the archers here. Meanwhile, that ballista heading into the front line, that, again, the Rudauer swordsmen don't have the finest morale, so over time that might be enough to cause a bit of a break here for the blue team. Another hit, another hit. Beating on the Misty Mountains front line like a drum. So far, the Misty Mountains, I mean, to give them their credit, they have managed to stand. I mean, their front line has been forced back a little bit, but considering the calibre of Elven troops they're going up against, not bad. I would still back the blue team, certainly, over the long haul in this initial engagement. Whether or not they can get through it efficiently enough to then kill off the Misty Mountains with all of their reinforcements back there, we shall see. Keeping an eye on the timer as well. We are approaching the halfway point of the battle as well, so soon we will be having a look and seeing how much of a percentage each side has lost. The Warns of Alos Tyrion still firing, and of course a lot of the Rangers have been committed forward as well, to be fair. You can see that one of the Linden armies is still down in the lower portions of the map in reserve, and he will still have his Warns of Alos Tyrion, but now we can see Rudauer coming forward with their Trollshaw axe throwers. Those axes and those javelins from Rudauer at this point could be absolutely key, because this is exactly the sort of engagement where they're going to really enjoy their time. Throwing tons of axes into these blobs of goblins, doing a lot of damage. Here come the White Uruk Fearmongers, again, a little bit depleted at this point. I think this was the unit that was getting shot beforehand, and now they're getting shot even more so. Decent armour values, actually. You can see that even sort of without their shields, if that had been an unshielded unit taking that much damage, they would probably already be mostly dead. But again, decent armour, and now they're sort of getting to the point where they're very, very thin on the ground. And again, with those Trollshaw axe throwers throwing in as well, there is a school of thought which suggests that they aren't going to get into melee at all, or at least when they do get there, there's not going to be enough of them to make too much of a difference. Black Uruks, you can see that all of the reinforcements over there that were guarding that particular way in, at this point, are all being sort of transitioned over here, so that might be the opportunity that Grim has been waiting for, sort of waiting to sort of maybe hit them in the side. More Black Uruks are coming over to try and tie down this front line. You can see here that now, with the front line, the White Uruk Fearmongers are running. They never really got a chance to show what they're capable of in melee, but the Noldorin Horse Lords are coming in. The potential for gaps to open up is starting to appear, with a lot of these Misty Mountains units now starting to run for the hills, or what's left of the hills. They are basically at the top of them at this point. The Trollshaw axe throwers are here, and they've made a big difference. The AP damage from the axes that they've been throwing has been very, very useful. Axe throwers, of course, in 0.97 will not be AP, but they will have a higher base damage. And of course, Rudauer do have the Ferodrum javelins in reserve as well, so if they do need an even heavier hitter, they can send it in. Those Misty Mountains Ballista, however, or Ballistae I should say, have been doing the business. They have been getting some decent kills, but unfortunately the Warns of Alos Tyrion have probably been getting even more kills, which again, the Goblins do have numbers on their side, but the longer the battle goes on, the more I'm convinced that that numbers advantage is going to dwindle ever further. Still those Heavy Goblin Spears in reserve as well. Some Warns of Alos Tyrion, which it might be in a position for these Black Uruks to actually engage them in melee. These Rudauer swordsmen still fighting away all of these Heavy Goblin Spears. I mean, at the very least, seeing as most of the Misty Mountains front line is made up of the Heavy Goblin Spears, they do have a good shield value and decent armour, at least for what they are. So while the Rangers will still be able to do a lot of damage to units like that, it will be mitigated somewhat. And much better to go after the Heavy Goblin Spears from a Misty Mountains perspective than the Black Uruks, because the Black Uruks are really what is keeping their front line together at this point. More White Uruks being committed forward. Another charge from the Noldorin Horse Lords. It's hard to see sort of what the Heavy Goblin crossbows up on the ridge are doing, because there's so many projectiles firing backwards and forwards, but again, The Misty Mountains still eager to hold on to this front line and committing forward more reinforcements at this point. Heavy Goblin Spears, more spears, there's also more Black Uruks. The Black Uruks at this point are sort of trying to retreat to the relative safety of their front line. But at this point the Noldorin Horse Lords smell blood and they are going to charge forward. And there's very few other cavalry units which are as scary. It's a fairly hefty blob of rangers which that Misty Mountains Ballista is firing into. But we are now around about the halfway point, and the blue team have lost less so far. Again, one of those crossbows that could still turn around. A lot of rangers have already been used. We shall see. And of course the goblins can afford to sort of throw more units under the bus. And again, you can just see that the rangers getting into a very nasty position again. Firing right down the formation, exactly where you want rangers to be. They're firing point blank, literally point blank, into those Black Uruks. The Black Uruks are going to move forward to try and get into melee with them, which they will. So the Warns of Elos Tyrion will now have to make the choice of whether to stay there or to retreat, which I imagine they're going to get out of there. Rangers obviously going to be able to scurry away when it is only heavy infantry they're fighting. But at this point, you know, I mean, again, just to repeat myself, this front line is looking a little bit haggard at this point. The Rudar Swordsmen and the Noldorin Guard, they're damaged. Most certainly. There are still some Rudar Clansmen, amazingly enough. They were committed a little while ago, still in a spear duel with the Heavy Goblin Spears, which again, they will lose. But now, as we can see over here, Grim and the rest of his army has, of course, sent over a fair amount of resources to sort of help out over there. But he is now going to send the rest of his army, including his Noldorin Guard, and some archers and some pikes over here. And I think as well, you can see his Noldorin Horse Lords are also going to come down this way. So, with all of the resources that have been siphoned off this front line over here, which is now basically non-existent, they committed all their infantry to the main front. It is going to be effectively, I think, up to the Wargs to sort of try and make sure they can't. And again, these Wargs, I think they're going to be committed to the front line as well. So, Grim is going to be moving forwards, and this is going to allow the Elves and Rudar to start attacking this angle as well, which is perhaps a sign that maybe they want to retreat to this choke point over here, the Misty Mountains. Because they've held on to this choke point for a long time, and they've, you know, traded almost evenly. I mean, I say that now, you know, 8% differential is fairly hefty, but it's not insurmountable, and considering the quality of the forces that basically Heavy Goblins have been going up against, not terrible. But now you can see the Noldorin Horse Lords coming forward, skewering some Snaga. More Noldorin Horse Lords. There are these Wargs which are blocking the way. The problem for the Wargs is though they've got, the Noldorin Horse Lords have got the support of 2 units of axe throwers, rangers galore, and already the Wargs are already wavering. They're shaken now. Chasing them any further, however, is going to result in their doom. Oof. More axes being thrown, the Wargs getting into the Trollshaw axe throwers. The Trollshaw axe throwers are not good in melee, it's worth saying. You know, certainly if you want an axe thrower that's good in melee, the Franodine Berserkers are what you want, but Trollshaw axe throwers, oof, that's pretty lethal there. Can't imagine these Wargs are going to stay without routing for too much longer. And that does go to show. I mean, Wargs may be multiple HP, but they have next to no armour, so when their hit points are gone, it's a bloodbath. And they have very little melee skill as well, so again, when their hit points are gone, stuff like the Noldorin Horse Lords are capable of defeating them in melee pretty easily. Unfortunately for them, meanwhile, we have some routing units. I thought there was sort of an expeditionary force of Wargs then by looking at the minimap, but it is just routing units, which they could finish off, but I don't think these Black Uruks are going to return, so leading the way with, again, several units of Noldorin, a couple of units of Noldorin Horse Lords, which again, Knights, difficult to stop, and at this point the Misty Mountains are going to have to, they're going to have to make a choice to retreat, I think, because this front line at this point is pretty much lost. They're going to need to retreat to more sort of a defensible position to make sure that, again, if they allow the Knights to sort of run roughshod all over their back lines, it's definitely going to go downhill pretty quickly for the Misty Mountains. The Noldorin Horse Lords in particular are such a devastating unit of Knights. Still some spears over here. Ones of Elos Tyrion trying to fire at the sort of tactical retreat here of the Misty Mountains, because I do think that is what the Misty Mountains intend. Some units are running, some units are being sort of left behind as a rear guard, sort of very depleted units of crossbows that are out of ammunition, blocking the way. Meanwhile, these Noldorin units still over here. There's still some Wargs helping to block the way, but again with all of these Linden Knights and and they're definitely going after the ballista, and the ballista crew is not going to survive this. They are doomed. Destroyed, ridden down there. And again, I mean, the Misty Mountains don't have a huge amount of excuses there, because there was plenty of time to see the Linden forces approaching, and they knew that this was always going to be a place they could attack from, because initially they had infantry and basically an army here that they then had to move over to the middle to sort of hold back the blue team's advance. As the Noldorin Horse Lords continue to move. The Black Uruks, I think they're going to be able to get away. I don't know, actually. Cycle charging will probably mean that they actually get destroyed. Mountain Orc Berserkers revealing themselves. But, again, against armoured cavalry, the AP would actually be quite useful. But again, the Noldorin Horse Lords, while their lack of armour is usually a bad thing, in this case it will actually help them out, because the armour piercing will not be as useful as it would otherwise be. And now is the time for all of these Linden Knights to really do some damage. You can see here, heavy goblin crossbows, that's definitely the sort of target they want to go after. Kill off as many of them as they can. Just riding right through them. There is another unit of crossbows here though, which is firing point blank, and they need to be a little bit careful here, because there are White Uruk Fearmongers chasing them down as well, so this could actually be the end of this unit of Noldorin Horse Lords. I mean, they certainly lost quite a few unit models there, but there is also another unit of Horse Lords coming in from Mech Grim. Able to get those White Uruk Fearmongers away, so yeah, this is going to be this sort of road here. Obviously they have no choice but to go through this, the attackers. There is obviously still one long choke point leading up to the higher ground. It's one long slog to the end now, and the Misty Mountains are going to have to hope that this choke point is enough to mitigate the quality discrepancy that they're up against here. There are the Noldorin Horse Lords again, trying to sort of cut down the Mountain Orc Berserkers once again, popping into existence when least expected. But again, it's with the Noldorin Horse Lords around, ambushes from the Mountain Orc Berserkers were always going to be a little bit easier to respond to. Still a huge amount of heavy goblin crossbows up on those ridges. Again, as soon as the crossbows are out of ammunition, and needless to say, they are pretty trash in melee. They will be cannon fodder at best. Against Noldorin Guard, I mean, here you can see the Black Uruks have essentially been abandoned. I think they're just going to sort of stand and fight and try and get as many kills as they can, but unfortunately for them, they are certainly not the sort of unit which is designed for this sort of fighting. So yeah, the Noldorin Horse Lord is going to be able to kill off the Black Uruks, and the Black Uruks, of course, pretty important to the Misty Mountains here, because they do have a half-decent amount of melee defense. Here, these Mountain Orc Berserkers also. Heavy Goblin Spears are shaken, and again, just a decent charge in the rear by the Noldorin Horse Lords could be just enough to send them routing. You can see there the Reforged Javelins, the sort of white dots in the distance. They're larger war clubs. Are they going to rout? I don't think so. I mean, they might be able to save this unit of Heavy Goblin Spears if nothing else. They're still shaken again. A nice meaty charge would probably be enough. Heavy Goblin Crossbows trying to provide some support fire. Noldorin Horse Lords have taken some decent damage as they've gone in here, but they've certainly sort of scoured this defence and forced the Misty Mountains back even further. And here are the Linden Knights as well. The Black Uruks defeat a distinct possibility, naturally. Now being skewered. So many Linden Knights. Velos Tyrian as well. There you can see the Reforged Javelins, definitely the strongest unit that Rudauer have got at their disposal today. Multiple HP in melee, obviously the Javelins the main attraction here, a lot of damage off of them, but also multiple HP shock units in melee. And with that AP they could be very, very handy against the Misty Mountains indeed, and now it's all a matter of reorganisation, I think. It's still right the way back to essentially the road up onto this higher section. We've also still got some units in reserve, as has Creed, as has Grim. I think ultimately Rudauer are the ones to have lost the most in this initial engagement, which is unsurprising again. Definitely more the cannon foddery armies over the Linden forces. But still filling a vital role. Towards Velos Tyrian. There's a lot to deal with for the Misty Mountains. Again, it's an interesting position, because again, 4v4 with a defensive position like this, you would fancy your chances, but considering the quality of the foes, the Misty Mountains have got it all to do. Trying to get into position there as well. Fighting something in melee. There's a single Mountain Orc Berserker immediately getting shanked by this flood of Rudauer marksmen. This might be where... Well, actually, you can see over here, this unit of Mountain Orc Berserkers. I could swear then that they were taking range damage from somewhere, potentially some crossbows. Yes, they are. Those crossbows up on the hill there, doing some nice damage. I think those Wardens are actually out of ammunition. They've got their swords out. Still 5 Mountain Orc Berserkers left, and taking swipes at the marksmen and the Wardens of Alos Tyrian as they move through their space. Every kill counts. Rudauer swordsmen moving forward. So again, Rudauer are the ones taking point. Rudauer marksmen. I don't know whether they still have ammunition. Again, like I said, they've got their axes out, so I guess we'll see. If they do, potentially very useful tool, because again, they can really put the pressure on the Misty Mountains Frontline. Here you can see the heavy goblin crossbows. They are actually shooting into the Rudauer marksmen, so not really content to abide their presence in front of their front line any longer. Betrayal of Rudauer. Betraying the forces of evil. That ballista is in a nice position as well. It can shoot right along the theoretical front line that will form. Still Mythalon pikes as well. Again, we haven't seen any of the Linden pikemen be committed forward yet. And they will do quite nicely against the White Uruk Fearmongers, being the halberdiers that they are. We are sort of setting the table here, but I feel as though possibly a little cut here is in order, because there's a lot of sort of disparate units. Clearly that the Blues are going to try and move together. So I'll make a little cut, and then we'll rejoin when they're sort of, again, engaging with one another. So here we go again. The Noldering Guard are moving forward, and immediately the White Uruk Fearmongers are going to have to get back into a tighter formation, lest the loose formation allow the Noldering Guard to sort of break the phalanx. You can also see over here the Ferodrum Javelins are starting to get into a position which, again, if they get a nice position to start throwing their payloads into the Misty Mountains forces, it's going to be a lot of nasty AP damage they're going to be catching. However, they do still have a unit of crossbows very close by, and they are still firing into these formations over here. Definitely the Ferodrum Javelins is what you want to go for. They may be multiple HP, but just the fact that they're good at range and in melee means you want to get rid of them, because even if you think that you can absorb most of their range damage by sort of being in loose and sort of trying to mitigate it that way, they're still going to be good in melee, so you want to kill them off at some point. Going for them with the crossbows now, definitely the right thing to do. Some more clansmen down there as well, so Rudauer sort of coming forward with a lot of their forces as well, but we have a unit of Noldering Guard from Rules 1, which is certainly leading the way, going after the White Uruk Fearmongers, and so far so good for them actually. They haven't been able to really get their phalanx into full effect, and obviously in close quarters, the excellent swordsmen that the Noldering Guard are going to be able to do some nasty damage indeed. Still crossbow bolts flying around all over the place as well, Wardens of Alos Tyrian. Noldering Guard actually pulling back now, so I think now is the time for the Ferodrum Javelins to try and do what damage they can. See, again, it's rare that you see the Noldering Guard sort of sent forward as a sort of unit to try and absorb damage. But here we are. This is the crazy world we live in with these Linden armies. This is almost like the elves at their height. And they still need assistance from the savage men of Rudauer. Wild. And here come the Rudauer marksmen again. They could just be being used to sort of melee fodder at this point. And there goes the Ferodrum Javelins again. And if any one Javelin that finds its mark here is going to be able to kill off a Fearmonger, which, considering this is really the bedrock of the Misty Mountains defensive lines, if they can get rid of them, they're probably going to go on to win the battle overall, to be fair. More Wardens of Alos Tyrian again. They've still got their bows out. That's a bit of ammunition that they must have. Still in the background over there, we've got those heavy goblin crossbows up on the hill there, which are firing at something. What are they firing at here? The elongated reloading process of a crossbowman. And they are going after the Wardens of Alos Tyrian that are right below them. Again, the AP might not be particularly useful against Linden, but the stopping power and the missile damage most certainly is. Any bolt that finds its mark is certainly going to inflict some damage. There you can see once again that the Ferodrum Javelins are starting to tear in to the White Uruk Fearmongers, and Misty Mountains don't really have too much of a response to this, because these Rudauer marksmen, clearly they're out of ammunition. They're just being used as a meat shield to ensure that the Rangers and the Javelins can go about their grisly work. And if the Misty Mountains did by chance come forward with some quality units, the Noldering Guard are on station as well to ensure that that's not an issue. Here come the Rudauer marksmen with their hatchets, going to try and do some damage, and at this point White Uruks are depleted enough to the point where well, certainly with the Noldering Guard, but if they came forward with just Rudar Marksmen, that might have honestly been enough, and the White Uruk Fearmonger's now already shaken. Heavy Goblin crossbows that are out of ammunition, again just being essentially thrown in the way of the Noldering Guard. This is certainly not going to slow down the mighty Elven infantry for too long. More White Uruk Fearmongers are being committed to the front line, and this is a healthy unit as well of 163. So if they get into position, they might actually be able to do some decent damage. They're going to need the support of the heavy Goblin Spears, I think, though, as well. The problem is, though, again, these Ferodrum Javelins. Ideal in this sort of situation. They're going to be able to throw over the heads of their own men, particularly seeing as the hill here is actually helping out the attackers, because it's giving the Javelins a clean shot right into the defensive line. There's a little bit of artillery action going on as well. The Ballista starting to fire away. The Noldering Guard and the Rudar Marksman trying to move. I mean, at this point the Ballista is only hitting Rudar Marksman, which, to be fair, I think the attackers will accept. Not exactly the most important unit to their cause at this point. The Ferodrum Javelins and the Noldering Guard are the centre of this attack. White Uruk Fearmongers, they're trying their best, but again, they're just catching Javelins in the face. Cloud Pirates online, and again, it's a savage assault from the Ferodrum Javelins. Again, they're not the best Javelin in the game. I certainly think that, well, in terms of missile damage, I certainly think that deserves to go to the Demons of the Desert. But alongside the Balchol Sapphire Bladesman, they're in a close second, I think. And in melee, pulling out those big old clubs of theirs, I think they are out of ammunition now, but they are good in melee. And with that AP, and that, you know, these White Uruk Fearmongers already broken, and now the Ferodrum Javelins and the Noldering Guard are going to come forward, and a single unit of Heavy Goblin Spears is not going to be enough. Again, it's possible here that the crossbows will still sort of drag the Misty Mountains over the line. But I think these engagements here, they've been sort of slow and grindy, and they've been in favour of the attackers only, because while those crossbows up on the hill were getting some hits into the Rangers, forcing the blue team to sort of reorganise themselves a little bit, it was nothing too impressive. I mean, there's another unit of White Uruks over here. I can understand why they're not blobbing up, though, because blobbing up is death when you've got that many Rangers around, when you've got another unit of Ferodrum Javelins coming in. It would be a poor idea. So it's definitely a catch-22 for the Misty Mountains. While usually I sort of say that layering your defence in this manner is certainly not the right thing to do, with all of those Rangers around, they don't really have much of a choice. These Ferodrum Javelins, they are being overwhelmed by Goblins at this point, though, maybe chasing too far. And the Heavy Goblin Spears fighting back a little bit here. More Ballista Bolts coming in. I did notice as well, I think there is, yes there is, there's some Elven Siege over here which is also putting pressure on the front line. However, one of them has already been destroyed by the Misty Mountains Ballista across the way. We haven't actually seen any of the Elven Catapults in action yet, which is interesting. There's still forces all the way back there, those Elven Ballistas. There's still some Noldorin Horseswords as well. I think, to be fair, that the Noldorin Horseswords have already been as effective as they're going to be in this battle. They could obviously find more gaps, but with all of the Spears and Fearmongers around, definitely going to be sort of a sort of wrapping up the battle only type functionality that they're going to have at this point. Meanwhile, these Heavy Goblin Spears, they are shaken. A lot of pressure. I mean, the backs of these units are turned at this point, so this could be the moment that these crossbowmen have been waiting for. Rudar Marksmen coming in to try and prevent the reinforcements from the White Uruk Fearmongers coming forward, which they will manage for a time, but obviously, again, there are now crossbow bolts coming in, but again, the crossbow bolts are going after Rudar Marksmen. The Ferodrum Javelins, the Noldering Guard, they're the units you really want to be going after. There's big old clubs from the Ferodrum Javelins with the AP as well. Ones of Elos Tyrian firing in. Again, there's a fairly decent blob for them to go after over here, so decent use of their time. More ones of Elos Tyrian trying to fire at point blank. Ferodrum Javelins charging in. There isn't enough. They did actually take a fair amount of damage there by charging too deeply into the Goblin ranks, but their AP should still be very, very handy. Another unit of Goblins over here trying to sort of keep these forces at bay. The other unit of Ferodrum Javelins is over here. They haven't used up their ammunition just yet, but they're being engaged in melee, so they might want to do something about that. Firing at those Heavy Goblin Spears that are already routing, that was certainly misclick or just sort of putting them on fire at will and then not paying too much attention. Most of those javelins are hitting the floor as well. These Noldering Guard are going to be able to surround these heavy goblin spears, though, and now caught between a rock and a hard place. Two very strong melee combatants, provided the Reforged javelins actually get their clubs out and start doing some damage. More goblins on the way, but it's crossbowmen that are out of ammunition, I think. So again, they can go up against the Rudar Marksmen and have a wet noodle contest, or they can charge into the Noldering Guard and be eviscerated. It's really up to them. The Reforged javelins are retreating now. Some more Noldering Guard on the way forward. I suppose at the very least, even though there's a lot of Noldering Guard on the field, there are no Noldering Blade Masters that we saw. So that's something for the Misty Mountains to be thankful for. Again, a lot of arrows just coming in over the hill. Heavy Goblin Spears, and it is from the Wardens of Elos Tyrian, so I guess at this point they're just sort of trying to whittle down the Misty Mountains infantry strength. Because a lot of those units they've got up on the hill over there are crossbowmen. Which, if it comes down to a fight in melee against what remains of the Elven infantry, crossbowmen are not going to cut the mustard. And now we're starting to see some catapult action as well. The High Elven catapult going to be trying to get some tasty hits on units like the Black Uruks and the White Uruks, undoubtedly. The White Uruks have really cleaned up those Rudar Marksmen that they were in melee with. They're now going to be able to get into melee with the Noldering Guard. Unfortunately for them, however, the Ferodrum Javelins are ready, and this is going to be nasty. We're going to see a very nasty volley right here, I'm sure. If they wake up. Come on, you can do it. They're right there. They're shaken as well. This would be enough to break them. Or if you're not going to charge, if you're not going to use your javelins, just charge in. It would be enough to break them. Oh, javelins. What a nightmare. To be fair, these White Uruk Fearmongers, it says defeat is a distinct possibility. But, you know, a bit of a surround here again. Units that are, well, the crossbows are already routing again. This is the problem that you have when you're trying to make Goblin Trash fight up against some of the finest Elven units that are around. The chances of them sticking around in melee for any length of time are limited. So I assume that the White Uruk Fearmongers only cause fear and they don't inspire, which would make a certain amount of sense, but it's not very useful in this situation because the Elven morale is so high that you're never really going to be able to fear rout them unless you're sort of hammer on anvil charging them as well. The Noldering Guard, however, they know that they've got the beating of this force over here. The Ferodrum Javelins are here as well. I think they're about to use their Javelins as well, and here they go. Into the White Uruk Fearmongers. This should be enough to rout them pretty quickly. They're wavering, and they're routing. Easy as 1, 2, 3, that. For both Lyndon and Rudau, who have worked very well in tandem up to now, but it has been a punishing advance. There is no doubt about it. The goblins of the Misty Mountains have made them pay for every step thus far, and there are still plenty of goblins to cut their way through as well. So, that's this front line pretty much dealt with as well. Certainly not as hefty as the front line over in the background over there. I think that they routed this direction as well, yes. The heavy goblin crossbowmen being destroyed before they can even rout off the field by the Ferodrum Javelins. Heavy goblin spears and crossbows sort of forming up the next front line. What we got over here? We do have a single Rudar Marksman who has decided that he can win this battle all on his lonesome. And he is fighting here. Taking point. The lead man. And he is parrying. He is a parry god. Although certainly as far as melee units goes, heavy goblin spearmen should be able to defeat Rudar Marksman. Although they're actually going to retreat at this point because the Noldering Guard are here. So this one Rudar Marksman, he's chasing him down. He's not happy. He wants this guy dead. Although at this point he may die by by proxy really, because I don't think the crossbows are after him. But one of the stray bolts may indeed hit him. And he is going after. I want to see the outcome of this duel. And there it is. He got too greedy and he got butchered by that polearm wielder. Meanwhile, heavy goblin spears forming up a front line. I mean, this is a depleted unit of Noldering Guard at this point, so holding the line. The issue, however, once again, the Wardens of Elos Tyrian just tearing into these poor goblins. The catapult also putting on pressure. The catapult doesn't really need to get a huge amount of kills at this point. I think it just needs to to keep the pressure on. These Rudar marksmen who have charged in behind as well. I think they're trying to sort of prevent the crossbows from firing, but they are on guard mode, which allows them to sort of stand and fire even when they're in melee, within reason. The crossbows continue to streak across and hit the units in the background there. Oof. He caught a few stray bolts there. He absorbed the ammunition. What a champion. And it's clear that the crossbows are trying to kill off what remains of the Wardens of Elos Tyrian. Heavy goblin spears, the balance of forces. Flitting backwards and forwards between being even, victory and defeat, but they should be able to win this fight actually. The Noldorin Guard are very depleted at this point. But with the support of the Wardens of Elos Tyrian, that would change. Noldorin Guard I think are actually going to pull back, so don't fancy being in melee with the heavy goblins any longer than they already have been. Still a couple of crossbows down here. They're in a very precarious position. One nudge and they'll fall to their doom into that abyssal chasm down there. There is the Noldorin Guard. These Wardens of Elos Tyrian though doing a lot of damage, and advancing here is a mistake for the heavy goblin spears, I think. Because the closer they get, the easier the shot becomes for the Wardens of Elos Tyrian, and they're going to break long before they're able to engage these Noldorin Guardsmen in melee. And that is going to be the end of this unit of heavy goblin spears. At this point, this unit of Noldorin Guard, even though there's only 10 of them left, should be enough to kill them, and there we go. Routing. And I think the only way they can get off the map is through. That is an unfortunate reality of this map and the position the Misty Mountains are in. In order to sort of route off the map, they need to go through the position and go down here that the attackers already occupy. The announcer is thinking pretty highly of the attackers' chances, and I do too, because I feel as though most of what the Misty Mountains have left, they must have a fairly high proportion of crossbows, which as far as melee troops go is not going to be enough. The Noldorin Guard have certainly been the difference here in this battle so far. I think they've been so strong on the front line. Backed up by the numbers and the javelins of Rudawa, it's been difficult for the Misty Mountains to try and engage with that. The Noldorin Horse Lords were obviously very key in that middle section of the battle as well, helping to cripple that first defence and force the Misty Mountains back into this defensive position here. So the question remains now, what do the Misty Mountains do? We are down to 15k frames, which is enough for some whole battles to be nestled within, so there's still potential for a lot to change. This is where most of the infantry still remains. There's still some Noldorin Guard, a fair amount of Noldorin Guard. The chariots as well could be very dangerous, and there's obviously pikes as well. However, while this is a very strong force of infantry, and they still have those knights as well, if they have enough ammunition left in their crossbows, and if they are able to set them up in a position where they can get a lot of crossfire, the Misty Mountains could still turn this around. That Noldorin Guard actually routed there, so they charged too close to the crossbows and have now been forced to retreat. However, I think these crossbows would be best off trying to save their ammunition where they can. It's not the easiest terrain to defend, to be honest. It's quite lumpy and bumpy. There's still these ballistae up here as well. This ballista's actually firing as well. Well, this one's firing. I mean, this is the glitch I was talking about before, where if you get your artillery too close to the cliffside of Medieval 2, this will happen. So, at the very least, it's still able to fire, but it will not be able to be moved at this point. It is now certainly stuck in this position. What is it actually firing? I would assume some of these units over here. Again, there's Noldorin Guard. Are they going after the artillery? They may very well be. I think they are, based on the fact that they're not... yes, they are. This High Elven Ballista over here. The fact that they're not using fire ammunition is a telltale sign that they're being used to try and snipe artillery. Which is good to see. I mean, I still feel as though at this point they need their ballista to do some work against this Elven infantry, because again, another force of Noldorin Guard is getting ready to head towards the front line. I think actually it's probably a good idea if we move into ×2 speed as the Elves and Rudawa sort of gather their forces, gather them for another assault. Actually, I think we can see over here, not actually able to hit any of these artillery pieces thus far. Which is actually a mix, I think, of... yeah, because two of those units over there are dead, so this is actually two ballista units, technically speaking. The Noldorin Guard have really shown their strength today, but it's unsurprising. I mean, most of the time you'll only see one unit of Noldorin Guard per Linden force, two at the very most. This, though, each Linden army had about 4. So for a total of 12 Noldorin Guard, it's pretty nasty. The Misty Mountains had their own forces. I think the attackers are going to win this. Maybe if this was sort of designed to be a little bit more of a close encounter, maybe give the Misty Mountains a few units of Bolg's champions so that they have a little bit more of an ability to go toe-to-toe with the Noldorin horse lords. Because standard wargs, while they are anti-cavalry, they're too fragile and flimsy to really be considered on the same sort of level as the horse lords. Whereas the Bolg's champions, very much on the same level. Meanwhile, those Noldorin Guard again getting a bit greedy. And this is where all of these units of heavy gob crossbows could be the difference maker. Reforged javelins moving forward, more Noldorin Guard, more Wardens of Elos Tyrian. Can the heavy goblin crossbows be the heroes that the Misty Mountains need? Layered crossbows. This one unit of spears is essentially being the ones that hold the line, and there's actually a unit with Azog in it as well. So Cloud Pyro's general putting himself on the line for the cause. Those crossbows just ran out of ammunition. Not the ideal time for it, but at least they'll be able to sort of put themselves in the way of this force of Noldorin Guard as well. What are they actually going after? I think they're going after the Reforged javelins, which is understandable because, again, the DPS they have with their javies is substantial. And here they go again. Again, going to be whittling down that force of heavy goblin spears on the front line. The Noldorin Guard engaging. Crossbow bolts now flying in every which direction. Should help the goblins a little bit. The Black Uruks are coming down, so I think the goblins are going to try and hold this position down here. But I don't... Again, I'm not sure. I think they've used up a lot of their bolts already, the Misty Mountains. I don't think they've got enough left to truly win this. Maybe I'm wrong. Reforged javelins over here, Wardens of Elos Tyrian. Very potent combination of javelins and rangers. And here come the Noldorin Guard, doing the business on the front line against the heavy goblin spears. The Black Uruks are sort of running to try and get into melee to support them a little bit. And that's a lot of Black Uruks. That'll be enough to hold them at bay for some time at least, but with the reinforcements, amazingly enough, we have not yet seen any pikes. It's all been the Noldorin Guard. All of the range firepowers have given Linden cold feet about using their Mithlon pikemen, I suppose. I mean, to be fair, I think each army only had one unit, so certainly not as present as the Noldorin Guard. Here are the Reforged javelins. The Black Uruks now on the front line. More White Uruks also coming down the hill. Still crossbows, just crossbow bolts, arrows, javelins, all flying backwards and forwards over this infantry engagement. With the Black Uruks, yeah, I'd say this is a little bit more even. The Noldorin Guard, with the support of the Reforged javelin, should still be able to. Well, actually, with the White Uruk Fearmongers, maybe not. More Wardens of Elos Tyrian moving forward, a unit of 100 of them. Black Uruks are here, heavy gob crossbows still doing their thing. Still that body piercing. The White Uruk Fearmongers trying their best to be the anchor that the Misty Mountains need, but I don't think it's going to help them out too much. Again, javelins just coming in. Still these crossbows doing their best to do what damage they can. One of these guys going after, they're repositioning themselves, actually, based on the fact that they pulled out some of them have pulled out their little short swords, so they should still have a bit of ammunition. Ooh, hello. High Elven Ballista, trying to shoot over the hill, and they do have a shot. That's worrying for the Misty Mountains, because if they take too much damage from that, their front line is going to break, and that is going to be the end. There are the Noldorin Guard. Victory, a distinct possibility at this point. The support of those Wardens of Elos Tyrian in melee, with their skill, dual-wielding those elven blades. Reforged javelins actually being caught out in melee a little bit, so Froggy is going to pull them back. Try and get them into such a position where they can use their javelins. Of course, as you can see over here, this man just pancaking this Black Uruk. So, in melee, the Black Uruks maybe not going to enjoy their time up against the Reforged unit, but even still. It's pretty much entirely crossbows at this point. There's a few units of Black Uruks also in reserve, but more ranger fire coming in. And now we're going to see some Mithlon pikemen on the front line as well, so the White Uruks are not going to be enough to sort of keep all of these units at bay. To be fair, this unit of Noldorin Guard, not looking so good anymore. Combination of black Uruks and white Uruks. Doing well. The numbers also certainly helping out. The Reforged Javelins don't really have the most ideal of shots. Those heavy goblin crossbows have pulled out their swords at this point, so again, more fodder for the front line. The announcer is very confident, and I would agree. I think that the elf human alliance is going to be enough to see them over the line. The Reforged Javelins now firing into the side of this depleted unit of black Uruks at this point. And it's unrelenting, really, because another unit of Noldorin Guard is going to come forward. And I think the will of the Misty Mountains is about to be broken. And again, you can tell that when they're responding to a fresh unit of Noldorin Guard with a depleted unit of heavy goblin crossbows in melee, it really is all hands to their posts. Do what you can to hold them off. On pikemen, they've taken a few losses on the approach. So again, this is why obviously the pikes have been held back until now. Those crossbows up on the hill, trying to kill off the Mithlon pikemen from rules as quickly as possible. There goes the general. Cloud Pyro laying down his life in service of the Goblin cause. The Warns of Tyrian have managed to sort of get behind the enemy lines at this point. They're going to force all of these crossbows to run away. They might even break them. That would be a big catch. Warns of Tyrian in melee, of course, much stronger than the heavy goblin crossbows. This unit of goblin archers has got a general in it, so that is where Starling's general was at. And now Cloud Pyro is going to send forward some black Uruks to try and stop this advance. Pikes are coming through. Yeah, this front line has now been overrun. The momentum. I mean, he's still there. He's probably going to get shanked. Can't imagine he's going to stick around in melee for too long. And there he goes. I mean, the black Uruks are here. More heavy goblin spears. They've done their best to hold the line in this battle. There's also some Snaga up here. Again, as soon as they're revealed, the entirety of the Elven skirmish force targets them. And look at that. Absolutely brutal. Reforged Javelins coming forward. They've got their clubs out. Once again, going to back up the Noldorin Guard, which... we're well within the final 10k frames now, and having a look at the percentage of kills, yeah, it's a deficit which I don't think the Goblins are going to be able to make up here. But it has been a pretty gruesome fight. The heavy Goblins here on the front line, still trying to hold back the mighty Noldorin Guard, but Linden will not be denied. Over on this side, meanwhile, defeat is a certainty for the Warns of Tyrian. These black Uruks doing what they can, but they're also being shot in the back by other Wardens of Tyrian, units that still have ammunition. There's another unit of Noldorin Guard on the way. This unit is going to retreat from the combat, however. It's interesting. Is he going to try and cycle charge? I mean, that would be... Noldorin Guard don't have the highest charge bonus, so surely not. They're line infantry, they're not shock infantry. Trying to sort of reposition themselves, perhaps, so that they're not getting friendly fire from their own javelins rangers. Well, Starling's general captured. Another unit of Noldorin Guard coming forward. That unit of routing heavy goblin crossbowmen is surely about to just be ripped apart as those units just sort of trample over them. The Mithlon pikemen, despite taking that pretty nasty range damage, are still here, poking their way through the Misty Mountains units one by one. Reforged Javelins here, and again, at this point, the rest of the Misty Mountains army must be mainly made up of crossbows, surely. There's, again, black Uruks, white Uruks, couple of units of them each, but mostly it's crossbows and obviously ballista crew. And that is not going to be enough. The elves are going to have victory here today, which I'm sure will please many of you. I'm actually glad as well. In 0.97, I think this is still the case anyway, that the Noldorin Blade Masters are being given the same unit model as the Noldorin Guard, only obviously they'll have the big sort of elven blade. The elven long blade, which I think is good, because I really like the look of the Noldorin Guard, and I think the Noldorin Blade Masters, they're the one unit in Linden's army which I'm not really the biggest fan of how they look, to be honest with you. Their helmet, if it was black, would look like something a Sith Lord would wear. Well, here come the Mithlon pikemen, all on their lonesome. Potentially going to try and kite backwards here in the Misty Mountains with all of their banks of crossbows, but it is not going to be enough. They're there are the Noldorin Guard, still very solidly in their position. The Reforged Javelins are here. The Ballista crew have been thrown under the bus as well. The Noldorin Guard. Just sort of retreating back a little bit here. Trying to get into those heavy Goblin crossbows as quickly as possible, and this is of course where the Noldorin Horse Lords can still come into play. They can close the distance pretty quickly, but they get a point-blank volley there from the heavy Gob crossbows. A Ballista crew coming in to try and break the Mithlon pikemen. Definitely doable. Still those heavy Goblin crossbows though. Noldorin Guard. Ballista crew again getting in the way of Noldorin Guard. It's brave, but yeah, I think it's clear to see at this point that the Misty Mountains just sort of trying to die with some honour. Here comes some White Uruk Fearmongers. That might be enough to break the Mithlon pikemen. The fear here, considering they're already wavering, might be enough to break them off. They're very depleted as well. Noldorin Guard are the only ones here. The rest of the Linden forces sort of making their way forwards now. Yep, they're broken. So the White Uruk Fearmongers actually managing to live up to their name of Fearmongers. Noldorin Guard going to just slice their way through the heavy Gob crossbows as quickly and efficiently as they possibly can. We are now very much into the final phase of this fight as the blue team sort of position themselves for the final advance. Those Reforged Javelins were seen and are now being shot by the crossbows. They're also still being bombarded by the Elven catapult, getting what kills it can where it can. Still some Ballista up there as well. Perched up, heavy Goblin spears waiting in the backfield. There's nothing else really though. So there were no Blackback Berserkers in the end. There weren't really any sort of really high tier infantry units or cavalry units in the Misty Mountains, which is surprising to me. I'm very surprised that they weren't at least given the courtesy of having a unit of Goblin King bodyguard each. Again, it's not the sort of thing which will go up against Linden elites, but it would at least give them some sort of rigidity to their front line, because they do buff the morale of their nearby troops. No trolls either, no troll drummers, so the Misty Mountains had to make do without a lot of their most potent tools here, and they were up against a very scary Linden force indeed. So in the end, I'm not too surprised by the outcome of this, but this will go some way to explaining why I think Linden are so strong at least, and why the elves are most certainly not underpowered, and why the orcs are most certainly not overpowered. Because the orcs had their numbers here, and they weren't able to overwhelm the attacking forces. The quality of the elves was too much. Noldorin Guard here. Noldorin Guard moving forward as the artillery again streaks through the air. Again, just getting a few peripheral kills here. Nothing too fancy. I think here it's best if we move up to ×2 speed here as the elves dawdle their way into combat. They certainly have victory here. Again, their reinforcements were very strung out, which wasn't terribly necessary really in the end. Another unit of Noldorin Guard over here. Once again, getting into melee. Still feels as though that's in ×2 speed, and yet it's only at ×1. Very strange indeed, but the Noldorin Guard. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle, apparently. As they cut and carve their way through the White Uruk Fearmongers. Still bombardment happening. And again, we are very much into the final phase of this fight. I'm actually a little bit surprised that the elves are not simply committing forward multiple units of Noldorin Guard to sort of crush this defensive position. Toying with their enemy at this point really, because they know they have the beating of them at this point surely. Several units of Noldorin Guard in reserve. They've even got the Noldorin Horse Lords, which they could really be sending up around this flank. They're really just prolonging the inevitable. And these White Uruks again, slowly being fed to the grinder, the Noldorin Guard. Showing Elven superiority in spades in this battle. More Mithlon pikemen moving forward from Grim. Unless they want their catapult to get a few kills, and that's why they're doing this. But even still, I mean, with the kills they're getting, all of these units are in loose formation, so it's not going to be a terribly impressive tally for the catapult. There are the Noldorin Guard. There's certainly no reason to be too scared of these crossbows anymore. They can just sort of move forward in force and push their way through. Still some Black Uruks. Here are the Noldorin Guard. Taking a little bit more damage perhaps from the crossbows, but again, managing to weather the storm reasonably well. Come the Elven units once again. I think, again, ×2 speed is necessary here, just because of how slowly the blue team are taking this, for reasons I'm not entirely sure of. They still have Wardens of Alos Tyrian in reserve, they still have more Mithlon pikes. Maybe they will prove me wrong and their caution will be warranted and the Misty Mountains will make a daring and epic comeback, but I doubt it. That's another general after all that just fell. White Uruks here on the front line once again. Just being killed off. The slender longswords here of the Noldorin Guard. Victory seems certain. That won't last too long, especially not with the Mithlon pikemen right there. They'll be able to outrange the Mithlon. They won't be able to outrange themselves. They'll be able to outrange the Mithlon. The White Uruk fearmongers. Get my words out. Here come the Black Uruks, and here we go. The last stand of the Misty Mountains. All of their infantry units being thrown in for one final fling. Trying to get in there, perhaps trying to sort of take away the range advantage that the Mithlon pikes have over the White Uruks. But those Wardens of Alos Tyrian, still a few of them have some ammunition. I would say ultimately that would be my criticism, I suppose, of this fight as a whole. The Linden forces have far too many ranges. I mean, Wardens of Alos Tyrian, everyone knows how strong they are. They were able to get so much done to the sort of vast blobs of Goblin forces. I think it was overkill to have Linden have so many Wardens of Alos Tyrian. It was really unnecessary. And the Noldorin Horselords, I mean, did they really need 3 units of knights each? I doubt it, especially seeing as the goblins of the Misty Mountains really had no very elite units. If they had like the equivalent, like if they had like several units of Bulge Champions, several units of Blackback Berserkers maybe, then I would understand it a little bit more. But really, you can't use the excuse that they had tons and tons of crossbows here, because crossbows are all well and good, but the Wardens of Alos Tyrian in this sort of situation, they're just better. Still, certainly from a melee standpoint, it was a little bit more even if the Misty Mountains didn't have access to their Blackbacks or their Goblin King bodyguard. With all of those White Uruks and Black Uruks backing up a hefty line of heavy Goblin spears, that's a solid front line. It's a solid front line to hold someone in place with that anyway, and the Noldorin Guard were just too good for them in the end. Here come the Knights. Again, I think it's about time we got to ×2 speed here. The fate of this last remaining force of goblins is already sealed after all, as the Mithlon pikemen continue. And I don't know, I guess the Noldorin Guard have largely been destroyed. I mean, there's still another unit of them back there. Most of the other forces are I'm surprised we never really got to see the chariots in action either. Like, I feel as though Linden had such a quality advantage here, they didn't need to use all of their army. Like, it's only really here in the late game when they were already winning the fight really that they deigned to commit forward their pikes. The Black Uruks doing their best to sort of force the Linden player back. The crossbows continuing to get some pretty nasty damage done. It will make this fight closer, of course, and again, that would be my... While I think that they always had an uphill fight here, the Misty Mountains, I feel as though they really needed to use their crossbows sooner, because here in the late game they have done some pretty decent damage, but their fate has already been sealed, so bit of a shame, but even so. Here come the Mithlon nobles, who will probably be more useful actually for their javelins at this point, more so than the ability of chariots, because if they try and force their way through, there's still a lot of spears here on this front line. Although they could get in behind and start routing these Snaga, and here they come. They're going to push their way through. Catapults, the morale shocks might be what does the Goblin forces in at this point. Chariots are right in and amongst it. Yeah, this is probably going to be enough to rout them off. Chariots can cause huge amounts of problems for morale, and the Misty Mountains have already got not the highest morale in the game, shall we say. Yeah, and here we go. Starting to rout en masse at this point. Here comes the chariots. This is going to be the end. I mean, the front line has collapsed spectacularly. under the pressure of those chariots. They definitely managed to avoid the heavy goblin spears. Well, now they haven't, but you can see how quickly the heavy goblin spears are able to kill them off. When you come up against an anti-cavalry unit, the chariots do fall away very quickly, so you do need to be very careful with the chariots overall. We are going to have another downhill charge. Players are starting to admit defeat now. The fate of the goblins has been sealed, really. There goes another general. They do make the same sound effects as elephants as well, which is what the sort of deep hum that you can hear whenever the chariots start to move in and amongst enemy formations. That's going to be the end of the spears, which there's only this ballista crew. Tidasium is the last one of the goblins left standing. But ultimately, a ballista crew is not going to be enough. And ultimately the Misty Mountains have been purged clean of the goblin filth. And Rudauer fully rehabilitated into the ranks of the forces of good. Arnor can finally reunite with them. This ballista crew still, surely he's going to admit defeat here. Or they'll rout. They'll probably rout actually with Noldor and Horse Lords right next to them. They're trying to get away, trying to remount their ballista perhaps. And they're shaken. As I said, ballista and artillery crew in general are literally the worst units in melee in the game, as revealed by J-Monster. So that is going to change in 0.97. Apparently they will be given sort of actual stats. They still obviously won't be any better than sort of standard archers in melee, but they will at least have a little bit more of a presence, maybe able to defend themselves a little bit more. They no longer, if they come up against one infantryman, will they collapse. But here they go. So victory for the elves, and Rudauer. A bloody fight it was, and a long fight as well. So obviously the goblins getting less kills because they had by far the largest armies. I say that Rudauer had a very similar army in sort of size, but that's to be expected. Obviously Linden, I think Grim and Creed had exactly the same army, considering they had exactly the same amount of men deployed. Rules had slightly the smaller, and overall the goblins had minor differences between them. So let's see what did the damage for all of the Linden armies, starting off with Grim. Yeah, so obviously 500 kills on the Wardens, again 300. The Wardens of Alos Tyrion, the MVPs for him. The Noldorin Guard, I still say, performed a vital service on the front line. The quality was too much for the goblins to bear. And again over here, Wardens of Alos Tyrion, huge amounts of kills. And again, Wardens of Alos Tyrion, Wardens of Alos, yeah. The Elven Rangers definitely proving to be why they won this fight, and I think it was a little bit overkill to give them so many Wardens of Alos Tyrion. Like, it's not as if stuff like Four Linden Archers and Harlinden Guard are bad. They still would have done the same job, and I think if you gave just each Elven army just the 2 units, or maybe just have one of the Elven armies have all of the Rangers, so let's say Rules had all the Rangers, I think you could have gotten away with giving Grim and Creed just Harlinden Guard, and the result, they still would have won, I think. But it would have been maybe a little bit less all on the Wardens of Alos Tyrion. I think the Noldorin Guard also a big part of that. And obviously then Rudauer, just the support and the numbers, particularly in that initial fight, which was very bloody, obviously. Definitely coming into play as well. So big thank you to Rules for sending this one in, and big thank you to all the players for taking part. It was an interesting battle. It was an entertaining one on a map which I very much enjoy as well. The Iron Hills is definitely an interesting map with its multi-layered nature. It's got choke points. It's got more open parts to it as well, which we didn't actually get to see in this battle, but we have in the past. So yeah, big thank you to him. Next up, I think I will be doing a scenario which was sent to me by Belagost. I was going to intend to release it over the course of the weekend, but thanks to YouTube balking one of my uploads, I've had to sort of readjust my schedule. And that one will most probably be releasing on Monday, I think, depending on how things go. But yeah, anyway, regardless of whatever comes next, I hope you will join me for it, and I hope you enjoyed this as well. So I'll just sort of reposition those words so that I do my sort of standard outro. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.